I've spent countless nights staring at a blinking cursor, wondering how to put into words the strange, tumultuous journey that has defined the last decade of my life. My name is Jack Richardson, and until 9 years ago, I was a man with everything in place. A successful financial executive with a promising future and a loving wife, Lori, who was the anchor in my whirlwind existence. Looking back now, it seems almost surreal that one seemingly ordinary day could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. It started on a crisp autumn morning. I'd always been an early riser, relishing the quiet moments before the city stirred to life. I decided to take my bicycle out for a spin, a rare indulgence in my usually hectic schedule. The streets were almost empty, the sunlight dancing off the dew-soaked pavement, when an inexplicable, almost magnetic force seemed to pull me toward a narrow, lesser-known lane. I can't say I understood why I chose that route, but in hindsight, it was as if fate had laid out a twisted welcome mat for the unknown. I remember the moment everything went awry. One minute, I was cycling along the edge of a peaceful park, and the next, I felt a sudden jolt, a violent impact that left me disoriented and gasping for breath. The world around me seemed to twist into strange angles, and time itself appeared to slow, each second stretching into a heartbeat of uncertainty. I don't recall the specifics of the accident, only that an uncanny silence followed, as if the universe had pressed pause on all sound and color. When I came to, I was alone in a place I couldn't recognize, a labyrinth of shadowed streets and unfamiliar structures that defied the logic of the city I once knew. Panic clawed at my chest as I tried to piece together the fragments of my memory, but nothing made sense. It was as if the accident had stripped away more than just my ability to ride a bike. It had stolen my connection to the world I had meticulously built. I attempted to contact Lori, my dear wife who had always been my constant, but my phone was dead, its screen an inert, mocking witness to my isolation. Every step I took in that eerie new environment was shadowed by the haunting absence of my old life. I wandered through deserted alleys, trying desperately to find something, anything, that could explain where I was and how I had gotten there. In those early hours of confusion, I clung to the hope that someone, somewhere, would be able to help me. I rapped on closed doors and shouted into the void, yet no one responded. It wasn't until the day bled into night and the twilight deepened into a suffocating darkness that I realized with chilling certainty I was utterly and inexplicably alone. 9 years later, that morning still haunts me, its bizarre simplicity belying the catastrophic rupture it caused in my life. Looking back, I know now that the bicycle accident was merely the opening chapter of a story far stranger than any financial ledger or corporate triumph. In the immediate aftermath, questions swirled in my mind like autumn leaves in a gust. Questions that had no immediate answers. How could an accident so mundane precipitate an unraveling of reality? Was it a random twist of fate, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of my otherwise predictable world? I've spent years searching for explanations, chasing down every lead and theory that could shed light on that bewildering day. The journey has taken me down dark alleys of conspiracy, encounters with figures who spoke in riddles, and moments of chilling clarity that hinted at forces beyond our understanding. But at its heart, this story is personal, a raw account of a man ripped from the familiar and thrust into the unknown. Now, as I start to recount these events, I realize how profoundly that day reshaped not just my existence, but my very perception of reality. I'm still grappling with the fragments of memories that intermittently return, like scattered pieces of a puzzle whose full picture I can't quite assemble. And somewhere, deep within the recesses of my mind, I feel that the truth is waiting, a truth that might explain the inexplicable and perhaps, in time, lead me back to the life I once knew. For those reading this, if you've ever felt that life can change in an instant, that the familiar can vanish in a thin air, leaving nothing but questions behind, know that you're not alone. I'm still on the journey, searching for answers to questions that only grow more complex with each passing day. And though the years of silence and uncertainty have etched themselves into my soul, I've come to understand that sometimes the most profound truths lie hidden in the spaces between what we know and what we have yet to discover. This is only the beginning of my tale, a tale of a man who was lost, not just in the physical sense, but in every sense of the word. A journey that took me from the pinnacle of corporate success to a place where every step is haunted by the echoes of a life that might have been. And while I cannot yet say where the road will ultimately lead, I can promise you this. I will keep walking, keep searching, and keep sharing my story in the hope that one day the answers will come flooding back. The day of the accident is seared into my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. I remember the sudden, jarring collision with a black SUV as if it were a scene from a nightmare. One moment, I was riding down a quiet street on my bike, enjoying the cool breeze and the calm hum of the city waking up, and the next, a hulking black vehicle careened onto the road as if it had a mind of its own. The impact was instantaneous and brutal, an explosion of metal, shattering glass, and a deafening cacophony that sent shockwaves through my entire being. In the chaos that ensued, I recall nothing but a blur of pain and disorientation. The SUV didn't slow down or stop to check if I was all right. It was as if it vanished into the ether, leaving me sprawled on the pavement with a searing pain in my head. I was immediately rushed to the hospital, but even before the doctors could work their miracles, I slipped into darkness. 8 long weeks passed in a coma, a timeless void where reality and dreams intertwined in a maddening dance. When I finally woke up, the world had shifted. The once familiar faces of my doctors and nurses seemed like distant echoes, and even Lori's presence felt different, distant, and uncertain. I soon discovered that I had suffered severe head injuries, and though my body had survived the ordeal, something essential within me had fractured. The vibrant, driven man I once was had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. I found myself shrouded in an inexplicable suspicion, a deep-seated distrust that clouded every interaction. Every sound, every glance, and every word felt laced with hidden meanings and unspoken threats. The people around me tried to reach out, to coax me back to the old version of Jack Richardson, the charismatic, successful financial executive who thrived on connections and charisma. But that Jack was gone, replaced by a withdrawn, aloof version who kept people at arm's length. I no longer saw the world through the same lens. Instead, every moment was tinted with uncertainty and paranoia. I felt as if there were hidden forces conspiring against me, whispering doubts into my ear with every step I took. The pain of the accident wasn't just physical. It seeped into my mind and soul, transforming me into someone I could barely recognize. In the months that followed my recovery, Lori and our 2 adult children struggled to bridge the widening gap between the man I was before and the man I had become. Family dinners turned into tense affairs, each conversation a minefield of misunderstandings and silent accusations. I could see the worry in Lori's eyes, the unspoken grief of watching someone you love slowly slip away into the shadows of his own mind. My children, who once looked up to me with admiration, now regarded me with a mix of confusion and trepidation. The warmth and trust that had defined our family were evaporating, replaced by cold silence and distance. 4 months after my discharge from the hospital, the inevitable happened. I disappeared without a trace. One day, I simply wasn't there anymore, leaving Lori and our children to grapple with the sudden void in their lives. I didn't plan it, nor did I intend to hurt them further. It was as if an overwhelming force had pushed me out into the unknown, away from the chaos of my own life. I left behind a house filled with memories, unanswered questions, and a lingering sense of betrayal for those who cared for me. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if my disappearance was a desperate attempt to escape the internal turmoil that the accident had inflicted upon me. I was no longer capable of living within the confines of the life I once knew. Every familiar corner of my home and every shared family moment now felt like a painful reminder of the man I used to be, a man who had lost his way amidst the rubble of his own mind. The transformation was so profound that even as I walked away, I felt a bittersweet liberation. I was free, yet imprisoned by the ghost of my former self. In the weeks and months that followed my disappearance, I wandered through a landscape that was both familiar and alien. I was haunted by memories of the accident, the screech of tires, the blinding flash of headlights, and the sudden, crushing impact that had rewritten the narrative of my life. Every step I took was a struggle against the weight of my own memories, each one a reminder of the fragility of existence. And while part of me yearned to return to the life I had lost, another part embraced the uncertainty of this new, uncharted path. My story is one of irreversible change, a collision that not only shattered my body, but also fractured the essence of who I was. I carry the burden of that day with me, a constant reminder that sometimes, in the blink of an eye, everything familiar can be swept away, leaving behind a trail of questions and the unyielding pain of transformation. Life on the streets is nothing like the life I once knew, yet somehow it became the only life I could bear. After disappearing from the world I had built, a world of polished suits and boardroom deals, I found myself wandering among those society had long forgotten. I earned the nickname the Mayor from my newfound community of homeless people. They saw something in me, perhaps a glimmer of leadership or a sense of empathy that transcended the brokenness we all shared. I wasn't a mayor in any official capacity, but I became the one they turned to when a problem needed solving or when hope seemed scarce. Every day was a struggle for survival. I worked odd jobs whenever I could find them, sweating under the hot sun as a construction worker, meticulously applying layers of paint as a painter, or mopping floors and emptying trash cans as a janitor. These jobs didn't restore the sense of accomplishment I once felt, but they kept me afloat. Each task, no matter how menial, reminded me that I was still capable of contributing something, even if it was just a small act of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic existence. In the midst of this rough and tumble life, there was one constant: Sarah. I met her on a rainy evening when I was huddled in a doorway, trying to shield myself from the downpour. Sarah was unlike anyone I'd ever known. Her eyes flickered with a mix of pain and defiance, and her words sometimes danced on the edge of reality. She had schizophrenia, a condition that made her see the world in vivid, sometimes distorted colors. But beneath the layers of her complicated past and the heavy shadows that clung to her mind, Sarah possessed a resilience that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. We quickly formed an unspoken bond. She became my closest friend in this unforgiving environment. Sarah and I would spend long hours talking about everything and nothing, our conversations meandering through memories of lost loves, missed opportunities, and the stark realities of our current lives. Despite her struggles, she had an uncanny ability to find beauty in the most desolate of places. Sometimes I'd catch her quietly sketching in a worn notebook, capturing the essence of the streets, the crumbling brick walls, the flicker of neon signs, and the ephemeral smiles of those passing by. In a way, she reminded me that even amidst despair, art and hope could still flourish. Amidst all this, I clung to a single relic of my former life, a family photo. It was a snapshot of happier times, a reminder of who I once was. Yet, as much as it pained me to admit it, I had to let go of certain memories. I had painstakingly cut out Lori's face from the photo. That act wasn't born out of malice, but rather a desperate attempt to sever the ties to a past that had become too painful to endure. The absence of her image symbolized the irreversible changes in my life, a permanent reminder that I could no longer cling to the fragments of a man I once was. Every time I looked at that photo, I saw a ghost of my previous identity, a bittersweet relic that simultaneously haunted and comforted me. Living among the homeless, I was constantly reminded of the fragility of life and the invisible battles many of us fought. The streets were a mosaic of broken dreams and unspoken resilience. I began to see beauty in the small acts of kindness, a shared meal, a warm blanket, or a moment of genuine connection amidst the harshness of the world. My new life was defined not by the boardroom triumphs of the past, but by the raw, unfiltered reality of everyday survival. Every night, I'd find a quiet corner under an overpass or in an abandoned building where I could reflect on how drastically my life had changed. I remembered the days when my biggest concerns were market fluctuations and corporate takeovers. Now, my concerns were far more immediate: finding shelter from the cold, securing a meal, and protecting my fragile sense of self from the relentless tide of despair. Yet, even in this stark new existence, I found a peculiar sense of purpose. I had become someone's beacon, a silent guardian in a world where trust was scarce, and every gesture of kindness could make all the difference. Through it all, Sarah's presence was a constant reminder that even amidst chaos, there was still room for connection. Our shared experiences forged a bond that transcended the pain and uncertainty of our past lives. In a way, our struggles became the very foundation upon which we rebuilt ourselves. And as I trudged through each day, I held on to the hope that, somehow, the fragments of my past could one day be reassembled into something resembling a future, even if that future was shrouded in the unpredictable mists of the streets. This new life was hard, unforgiving, and far removed from the opulence of my past, but it was real. And in that raw reality, I found a strange form of redemption, a chance to be more than just a shadow of my former self, to prove that even the most broken among us could rise, even if only for a fleeting moment, to be a light in the darkness. I never imagined that, just when I thought I had begun to settle into my new reality on the streets, fate would deal me another vicious blow. It was a cold, gray evening, and I was huddled in an alleyway near a rundown shelter, trying to gather what little I had left in my tattered jacket. The world around me was quiet, too quiet, when suddenly a group of figures emerged from the shadows. Their intent was clear: a robbery. I barely had time to register their hostile faces before they lunged at me. In the chaos of the attack, I struggled to defend myself. A sharp blow to my head sent me reeling into darkness. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed, my body a patchwork of wounds, and my mind swimming in confusion. The sterile scent of antiseptic and the steady beep of monitors were the only constants in that strange, disorienting place. I was in Texas, a state I had never intended to visit, let alone become a sanctuary in the aftermath of such brutality. Doctors told me I was in critical condition. The details were fuzzy, lost amidst a haze of medication and blurred recollections of the attack. But one thing was unmistakable: someone had left a clue behind. In the midst of the chaos and the hurried paramedics, a single yellowed piece of paper had found its way into my pocket. It was worn, as if it had traveled through time itself, and on it was a phone number, Lori's number. The paper pulsed with significance, its faded ink a reminder of a life I had long tried to bury. As I lay there, hooked up to machines that monitored every flicker of my faltering heartbeat, my mind began to wander back to the past, the fragments of a life that once was. Memories of Lori, once my anchor, now surged forth with unexpected urgency. It was a name that I had tried to forget, a face I had deliberately excised from a cherished family photograph. Yet, here it was, Lori's number calling out to me from the abyss of my recollections. Somehow, despite everything, the universe had orchestrated this moment. In that silent, sterile room, I felt a strange, bittersweet hope. It was as if fate was offering me a lifeline, a chance for redemption, and a possibility to mend the rift between the person I was and the person I had become. I clung to that hope with trembling fingers, even as my body fought to stay conscious. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, a woman named Lori was going through her own whirlwind of emotions. That yellowed piece of paper had found its way to her, a message from the past that demanded immediate action. When she saw her number scribbled in faded ink, a mixture of disbelief and resolve took hold. Without a moment's hesitation, she booked a first-class plane ticket to Texas. Every instinct told her that this was a call she could not ignore, a desperate plea for help from the man she once knew, the man she still loved despite everything. As the plane soared across the skies, I lay in my hospital bed, battered and broken, yet inexplicably buoyed by the knowledge that Lori was on her way. The sterile hospital room began to feel less like a prison and more like a gateway, a fragile bridge linking the shattered pieces of my past with a future I wasn't sure I could reclaim. I could almost hear her voice, soft yet determined, urging me to hold on, to fight against the darkness that had so thoroughly enveloped me. Days passed in a blur of pain management, restless dreams, and fleeting moments of lucidity. I struggled to piece together my memories, to recall who I was before the attack and before life had reduced me to this state of perpetual vigilance. The yellowed piece of paper remained my only connection to that past, a token of a love that I had once taken for granted and that now beckoned me to reclaim a part of myself. Then, one bright morning, the door to my hospital room opened, and there she was, Lori. Her eyes, a mirror of the determination and sorrow of years gone by, met mine. In that moment, I realized that fate had brought us back together, not as a return to the life we once knew, but as a new beginning forged in the crucible of hardship and redemption. Lori's presence was both a balm to my battered soul and a stark reminder of everything I had lost and everything that could still be salvaged. Her arrival, as sudden and unanticipated as the attack that had left me broken, was a miracle. It signified that even in the most desolate circumstances, hope could emerge from the most unexpected places. And as I reached out to grasp her hand, I silently vowed to fight for a future where the scars of my past, both physical and emotional, would not define me entirely. I never imagined that the reunion with Lori would feel like a battleground rather than a homecoming. When she first walked in my hospital room, there was a look of desperate hope in her eyes that I couldn't or wouldn't return. Instead, suspicion and anger had taken root in the cracks of my battered mind. I recoiled from her, accusing her of secret collusion with Tom, my former best friend. The very thought of their betrayal, of Tom comforting her when I was lost, was like a knife twisting deeper into wounds I never thought could reopen. Every time I tried to piece together my fractured memories, images of Tom surfaced, haunting and accusing. In my mind, their shared moments since my disappearance were proof of a conspiracy, a betrayal that turned love into a cold business transaction. I refused to see Lori as the woman who had once been my pillar of strength, instead seeing her as complicit in a plan to replace me with someone who had abandoned me long ago. Lori, however, was determined to mend the irreparable. She had tried everything to regain my trust, going above and beyond what any partner might endure. I remember the day she brought Sarah, a dear friend of mine who had been caught in the maelstrom of my life on the streets, into our lives in a way that was meant to heal old wounds. She'd spent a small fortune on Sarah, first buying her a new wardrobe for $1,200, meticulously choosing pieces that would make her feel dignified and valued. Then, she arranged for Sarah to experience a taste of luxury by covering the costs of treatments at an upscale beauty salon, a total of $750 that she hoped would help Sarah regain some semblance of self-worth. I sat there, my mind still clouded by suspicion, unable to appreciate what Lori had done. To her, it was a genuine gesture of kindness, an attempt to soothe the frayed edges of relationships tarnished by time and circumstance. In her eyes, restoring trust was as simple as mending the physical scars with a bit of luxury and care. But to me, these acts were tainted reminders of all that had been lost. Not just the life we once had, but the integrity of the man I used to be. Each time I looked at Sarah, I saw not the person who had suffered on the streets, but a reflection of my own brokenness. A broken friend who had borne witness to my gradual descent into isolation. I couldn't let her recovery be entangled with the memories of my betrayal, even though deep down I knew she had been a casualty of circumstances far beyond her control. Instead, I lashed out, using her as a pawn in a twisted game of mistrust and regret. Lori's attempts to bridge the chasm between us seemed feeble compared to the weight of my inner turmoil. I would push her away, insisting that my pain was too great a chasm to cross. Every loving gesture, every attempt at reconciliation felt like an intrusion, a reminder that I had been replaced, that I was no longer worthy of her affection. I clung to the belief that Tom's closeness with her was not born out of genuine care, but rather as a convenience for her, a way to fill the void that I had left behind. I began to question every moment from the time I vanished. Had Tom truly been there for her? Was their closeness simply the product of shared hardship, or was it something more calculated? I replayed countless scenarios in my head, each one leading to the same bitter conclusion. I was betrayed by the two people who mattered most in my life. Every act of kindness from Lori was interpreted through the lens of this perceived treachery. I couldn't see the woman who had tried so hard to mend our fractured world. I only saw the betrayal that had rewritten the rules of our relationship. Lori's eyes, once filled with warmth, now reflected the deep pain of rejection. I could tell she was hurt, that every effort to help Sarah and every gesture of care was a silent plea for me to let go of the past. But how could I forget? Every whispered conversation, every shared secret between her and Tom, echoed in my memory with a haunting clarity. I was convinced that she had built a new life with him while I was fighting for survival on the streets. And so, as she continued to show up with offerings of reconciliation, small acts meant to rebuild trust, my suspicion only hardened. I couldn't allow myself to be vulnerable again, not when the ghosts of my past had already torn me apart. The trust that once bound us was now a brittle relic, shattered by my own inability to see Lori's true intentions. In that fragile moment between hope and despair, I stood as my own warden, locked away from the love that desperately sought to break through my barriers. Even now, the wound of betrayal remains raw and unhealed. I know that somewhere deep inside, I still yearn for the old connection we once had. But every time I see Lori trying to mend what was broken, through acts of kindness towards Sarah or even the simplest touch of reassurance, I retreat further into the fortress of my mistrust. My heart has become a battlefield, and the war against my own vulnerability continues, with each act of love only deepening the scars of betrayal. For the longest time, Lori had refused to believe it. She had clung to logic, to reason, to the idea that the accident had been just that, an accident. But as she sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the muted glow of the bedside lamp, the memories began to unravel in a way she could no longer ignore. Jack had been insistent that Tom wasn't the man he once thought he was, and Lori had dismissed it as paranoia, a symptom of the head injuries and the years spent on the streets. But now, she wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces started falling into place. Before the accident, Tom had been everywhere, always offering to help, always showing up unannounced. He had made himself indispensable to them, fixing things around the house, helping with financial decisions, even calling Lori just to check in when Jack wasn't home. She had brushed it off as him being a good friend, someone concerned for their well-being. But now, as she replayed every moment in hindsight, it felt different. Tom had been obsessed. She recalled the subtle shift in his behavior, the way his presence had become a constant in their lives. Jack had never seemed to notice, but Lori had felt it, the way Tom's eyes lingered a little too long, the way he always managed to bring up Jack's long hours at work, hinting, too casually, that Lori deserved more attention. And then came the accident, a freak incident, or so she had believed. But now, she was beginning to wonder, had it really been random? Or had Tom orchestrated it, knowing Jack's morning routine, knowing exactly where he would be? The idea made her stomach turn. If Jack was right, if the accident had been deliberate, then she had spent the last 9 years living a lie, trusting the very man who might have tried to kill her husband. A shiver ran down her spine. Meanwhile, miles away, Tom was on the phone. His fingers tapped against his desk in a rhythmic pattern as he listened to the voice on the other end. "This isn't over," Tom muttered. The voice on the line responded in a thick accent, calm and measured. "You need Pedro?" Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "I need this handled. He's alive, and Lori's getting suspicious." There was a pause before the voice answered. I understand. Tom hung up and leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. He had worked too hard, waited too long for Jack to stay gone. He thought it had been taken care of all those years ago, that Jack had disappeared permanently. But now, here he was, back in Lori's life, poisoning her mind against him. No, he wouldn't let this happen. Lori sat motionless in her hotel room, gripping her phone tightly. Her mind raced with what to do next. She wanted to believe she was being irrational, that she was letting Jack's suspicions take root in her mind. But the way Tom had wormed his way into her life after Jack disappeared, the way he had been so eager to be there for her, it all felt calculated now. And if Jack was right about the accident, that meant Tom wasn't just manipulative, he was dangerous. She realized with dawning horror that she wasn't just worried for Jack anymore. She was in danger, too. Jack finally agreed to see his children. Not Lori, never Lori. The resentment, the betrayal, the unanswered questions were still too much to face. But his kids, they were different. They weren't part of the mess that had unraveled his life. They were the only tether he had left to something real, something pure. The meeting was awkward at first. Too much time had passed, and Jack could see it in their eyes. The hesitation, the uncertainty of how to approach him. They had been just teenagers when he vanished, and now they were adults with lives of their own, shaped by years of wondering what had happened to their father. They tried to fill him in, talking about college, jobs, relationships. But Jack could barely focus. He watched them speak, searching for traces of himself in their words, in their mannerisms. He was supposed to know them, to understand them on an instinctual level. And yet, as they sat in front of him, he felt like a stranger intruding on their lives. Lori wasn't there. She knew better than to push. He had made it clear that he wasn't ready, that he might never be ready, and she respected that, at least for now. Meanwhile, Lori had finally done what she should have done long ago. She cut Tom out of her life. No calls, no explanations, just silence. It had taken all her strength to sever that tie, but it was the only choice she had left. She had seen the truth now. Whether Jack ever forgave her or not, she had been blind to the warning signs for too long. Tom's obsession, his possessiveness, his eerie sense of entitlement to her life. She could no longer ignore it. But she had underestimated him. Tom didn't lash out, didn't beg, didn't try to argue his way back in. Instead, he was calm. Too calm. "You think it's that easy?" he had said when she finally told him to stay away. "After everything I've done for you?" There was no anger in his voice. No desperation. Just quiet certainty. And that terrified her more than anything. Because Tom was never the type to give up. Jack felt it too. Even from a distance, he could sense the unresolved tension lingering in the air. Tom wasn't done. And Jack knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Now, standing at the crossroads of his own life, he was faced with a choice he wasn't ready to make. Go back to the family that had moved on without him, try to rebuild a life that no longer felt like his own, or disappear again, vanish into the shadows where no one could find him, where no one could hurt him. For now, the answer remained unclear.